Hello and welcome to today's Academy on Air. My name is Claire and I am on the mobile transformation team here at Google. That means my actual job title is Mobile Transformer. I did always want to be a superhero. But what this really means is that I help our advertisers improve their mobile experiences. And specifically, I work on things like understanding cross-device user behavior, mobile UX, conversion rate optimization, and basically try to help advertisers drive more value from their advertising as well as delight their users. And so today we're going to talk about driving increased conversion rates through core mobile UX principles and recommendations. And now I work with a lot of sites, about 100 companies a year, ranging across industries from retail, leads, finance, and we see a lot of the same common problems when it comes to mobile UX. So we're going to talk about a little bit about why mobile UX is really important, what a good mobile user experience looks like, and then I'm going to dive into actually some of those specific recommendations. So if you have a site or a company you work with, I definitely recommend pulling it up on your phone and going through the actual user experience on the site as we talk through some of these recommendations. The other thing is we will have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions you want to ask, make sure to add them to the live chat or add them in the comment section, and I will try to get to them at the end. So let's go ahead and dive into a little bit about why, as marketers, we should really care about mobile UX. So I want to start with a question, which is, which site would you rather use? The one on the left or the one on the right? Which one would you really trust with your personal information, your credit card? I don't think any of us would really hesitate here. I think it's probably the one on the right. And really the question is why, though? As marketers, we're not necessarily looking at how many form fields there are, whether they use drop-downs or specific inputs, what the CTA says. It's kind of just a gut feeling. And this really just gets to the point of why UX is really so important to things like user trust. And especially if you're thinking about marketing, acquiring new users, this can be the first impression. And so these really beautiful kind of intuitive designs are easy to spot. And really, it helps lead to users feeling safer and more comfortable converting in that end and signing up for the products or services that you guys offer. So a lot of UX is really driven by what we're accustomed to, either industry trends or the websites or apps that we use a lot of the time. These have these really good design elements that are beautiful and intuitive, and they give off an air of familiarity. The icons we use, the types of navigation that really help us understand whether a site is credible. So not only is investing in design and user experience actually good for users, makes for better site experience, but can also be a bit of a competitive advantage. And so recently, Harvard Business Review actually released an article titled "The Value of Customer Experience Quantified." And they looked at a lot of sites that had really high conversion rates, low conversion rates, ones that had invested a lot in their UX and ones that hadn't. And they found that businesses with better mobile sites on average have 140% more revenue than those that don't. And so what this article really says is that delivering great experiences on the web actually reduces costs and in the long term, and is a competitive advantage that you can stand up to your competitors or just provide that extra benefit to your users. And I want to go back to this point about, where are we getting these kind of common experiences? How do we come up with, what's familiar on mobile and what users consistently look for? And a lot of this is driven by the apps and the sites that we use pretty consistently. So I don't know if anyone has ever been trying to locate a store. You're looking on a map. How frustrating would it be if you couldn't actually zoom in and see the actual address or the cross streets where the icon actually was? It was just an icon on a map. And we get a lot of that behavior from things like Google Maps and Uber. Another one, what if a cart didn't tell you how many items you added, or you couldn't actually edit it? What if you searched and you couldn't sort by price or the number of reviews? It would be really frustrating to try and find the product or the service that you're looking for. One of the other ones that we get really used to is having to go through 4 or 5 steps to check out. And this is kind of proliferated by companies like Amazon that have gone to one-click checkout. They have a lot of that information stored. If you think of Android Pay or Apple Pay, we've gotten really used to being able to do these things quickly. So if it's taking 4 or 5 steps, especially on mobile, people get really frustrated. A lot of the times, especially on mobile, we're checking our phones about 150 times a day. And it's about 60 seconds on average per visit. So we have short attention spans. We're going to be there for less time. So you really want to make sure that people can do things quickly, easily, and reduce the total amount of friction. So let's break it down a little bit more. What actually makes up a really good mobile experience? And we think of this as kind of 3 concrete pillars. The first one is speed. So you can have the most beautiful site in the world, you've invested so much in the design, and if it loads really slowly, no one is ever going to get to experience it. We recently did a study and found out that 53% of people will actually bounce if a site takes more than 3 seconds to load on mobile. So if you're loading on 10 seconds, likely a lot of people actually aren't getting to your site and potentially clicking on your ads. So the other thing is to make sure that you're keeping track of your load times, and especially on slower connections like 3G, which are still really prevalent in the US. It's still about the national average. So make sure you're keeping track of speed. And the second part of that is design. So once someone has actually gotten to your site, design is how they engage with the site and the content that you have. It's how you bring them in with your benefits, your kind of value propositions, your calls to action. It's how they engage and move throughout the site, and then eventually how they convert. And the last part of that is content. So someone gets to your site, it's loaded, they're looking for the information, and you want to make sure that information is really engaging and useful, whether that be product reviews, video, or even blog content. I want to stop really quickly and go back to kind of that number 1 on speed. If you are interested, the mobile site certification recently launched on the partners portal. And this is really geared towards developers, but I think it's really useful for marketers to understand a bit more of the technical aspects of how sites are built and be able to talk to designers and developers to improve your mobile experience. So if you're interested, definitely go to the partners portal and check out the mobile site certification. We'll also have another HOA or Academy on Air coming up next week on speed. So make sure to tune in then. Now let's go back to winning kind of on the mobile web. We really want to focus in on this design aspect in mobile UX. So hopefully most of you are familiar with Google's 25 design principles. What this was is the UX team here at Google looked across all types of different sites, all types of different industries to understand what is some of the functionality that users immediately look for on mobile. That's stuff that's really familiar. And they came up with 25 principles that are pretty consistent, grouped into these 5 categories. So homepage and site navigation, that's a lot of how you bring people into your site or landing pages, how they navigate to find information. Site search, conversions and the ability to convert. This is really important from an AdWords perspective, as well as looking at the site. And this is really where we'll be discussing today. Form entry, almost every site has a type of form or another, whether you be retail, leads. And then the last one is usability and form factor. And again, because we're focusing today on increasing conversion rate, I really wanted to focus on these 2, which is the ability to convert and form entry, because this really tends to be the lowest hanging fruit. These are the people who have already decided that they want your product or service, they've done the research, they're on their phone, and we want to make it as easy and frictionless for them to convert as possible. And so we see a lot of the same common problems. Again, I've looked at tons and tons of sites across a variety of industries, and there are some pretty consistent functionality that can be either improved or changed to make the mobile checkout experience or conversion experience a bit better. So we're going to get into some of those recommendations in this next section. And again, I really just want to, before we do, touch on the problems that we're trying to solve. So really, some of the common problems with conversion is I can't trust the credit card security. It's really hard to type, that there are a lot of form fields, which are really frustrating to fill out over and over again. And these are, UX really does solve problems that users are facing that create friction. And so we want to remove that friction by making the user experience better across the board. The last caveat here is that I really do recommend that all of these suggestions be A/B tested. We have this saying at Google, focus on the user and all else will follow. That was originally by Larry Page. And really what this gets at is if you focus on the user and the problems and the friction that they have, then design and making those changes will actually in the end lead to increased conversion rates, increased revenue. But the question remains, how do I know if design A or design B is better for my user? And that's where A/B testing comes in. If you're not currently using an A/B testing platform, I definitely recommend checking out Google Optimize. It is the new free A/B testing tool that was launched as part of the Google Analytics suite. So if you're not currently using one, I definitely recommend going and checking that out on the Analytics Hub. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some common issues we see with the conversion flow. And again, the reason I wanted to focus in on this is because this tends to be really low-hanging fruit. These are the people who've already made the decision that they want your product or service. So we want to make it as easy as possible for them to actually go through that conversion process. So before getting to actual conversion, the first suggestion I want to go through is making it possible to convert cross-device. So I talk with a lot of our advertisers about cross-device user behavior. Mobile does tend to be more upper funnel, tends to be a lot more research-oriented. We tend to use it a lot on the go. So not necessarily times where we're sitting down and wanting to fill out 30+ form fields. And so one thing to think about is actually other secondary conversions that can help facilitate this cross-device movement. And you'll see in these, I included a couple best class examples for each of these to look at, just because I think it's really helpful to see how some people are doing this. So the first one on the left is American Express. They realized that for their credit card, a bunch of people on mobile aren't actually really likely to go fill out 30+ form fields. So they actually have their primary CTA, which is to apply now. But realizing that people weren't necessarily going to sit down and apply on their phones, they added 2 secondary CTAs, which is call. So especially if you're on the go, I'm on the bus to work in the morning, I'm not necessarily going to sit and fill that out. I might rather talk to someone and actually apply over the phone or ask some questions. The other one here that I really like is that they added this email card info. So what this is, you put in your email, they send you a nice email with a summary of all the information, and then you can actually go back on whatever device, potentially desktop, later on, and you have that reminder sitting in your inbox. You can also add these people to nurture campaigns if you do email marketing, and it's a great way to continue that interaction across devices and across different points in time. The example on the right is Progressive. Again, scheduling or applying for an insurance quote can be a lengthy process. You might not necessarily have all of your information at one point in time. And so they added this save and return later functionality, which allows you to put in your email or phone number. You can then enter that later on, pull it up, save your progress, and you don't have to go halfway through the process and then realize that you need to continue at another point in time. The other thing that they do here is they do have their customer service number again. So if someone wants to call versus fill out the application, then they do give them that option. So think about different ways that your users might be, interacting with your site at different touch points. And if there's any way you can actually incorporate cross-device movement into the UX of the site. The next one I want to talk about is limiting exit points at conversion or checkout. And this actually goes back to a psychological principle. If anyone has studied behavioral psychology, the rule of noise, which actually says the closer you get to conversion, the less things that you should have on your screen. So if you've already made the process or made the decision, then you don't want to be able to go to the menu and view a different page of the site or continue searching for different products. Once you've really made that decision, you want to really limit actually the functionality. So on the left is a retail example. This is Nike. And you can see at the top, usually they would have a menu, they'd have a search bar. But once you actually get to the checkout phase, you just have the logo, which takes you back to the home page, or the cart icon, which will take you back to the cart if you want to edit anything. Similarly, on the right, Confused is in the finance space. They basically just make their header their icon, which goes back to the home page and really helps users focus in on the actual action at hand in their conversion process. I went through this with a retail site that I was working with, and they did this, and they had a 28% increase in conversion rate. That's just one example. So I'd recommend checking if you still do have your full menu at the top of your conversion pages, and think about, limiting those exit points so you can focus the user. The next one here is to consider using pagination if you have more than 2 steps in your conversion flow. And what pagination is it's that kind of progress bar across the top that delineates how many steps there are in the process. And really the whole point of this is to give users expectation. We get a lot of anxiety when we don't know how many form fields there are or how many steps there are in the process. And this makes you actually more likely to drop out. You might be almost to the end, but if you don't know you're almost to the end, then you might say, you know what, this is a lot. I'm going to come back and do it later. So progress bars let you know what to expect, and they also allow you to navigate between steps. So say, I put in some of my personal information, I get all the way to payment, I actually want to go change my shipping address, then it makes it easy to move back and forth between steps without having to click back, which can get pretty frustrating. This is one of the most important principles, I think, which is included in the 25 principles of mobile site design, but allowing for checkout as guests. So especially on mobile, we're really impatient. Casual users don't necessarily want to input all of their personal information and create a password, be forced to log in every single time. A lot of times I just forget my passwords unless I have a social account. So what these 2 retailers do, I really like, and I wanted to include both of these examples. The one on the left is ASOS. They are just a retailer, and it's really easy at the top to see the delineation between if you're a new user or a guest user, or if you've already registered and want to log in. You can kind of flip between those 2 options. And I like for guest checkout, they do have these sign up with social accounts, and they include a bit of a value proposition of why you should actually create an account and what you can do. And they allow you to kind of check out as a guest as the last option. Similar thing here with Michael Kors. Again, you can either sign in, create an account using social, or check out as a guest. And they do put this little kind of disclaimer at the bottom, value prop, saying you can always create an account later if you want to save and access your personal information. What I like about both of these is that they do have checkout as guest prominently displayed above the fold. It's not hidden below the fold. It's really clear and easy to see that that's an option for me. And they tell me, I can create an account later if I want, just, do it later on in the process. All right, so we talked a little bit about kind of the key points in conversion, and now I want to talk a bit about form optimization. Now, forms are the bane of probably everyone in design's existence. Everyone wants forms to be easier. We want them to be faster. We want them to be less painless or more painless. So form optimization is something people in UX focus on a lot. And the first thing I want to talk about is using descriptive CTAs. I think we get really used to having things like next, continue, submit, which are actually kind of ambiguous. Again, they don't give the user any expectation of, what information is coming next, what should I be prepared what information should I be prepared to input. So ensure that the action that's referred to in the CTA is consistent with whatever that next step is. I really like this German company on the right. They say continue to delivery. Delivery is that next step. So instead of saying just continue, you know that the next step is going to be entering your delivery information, and you can get ready for that. The other example, which is Zoomies, which is a retailer on the left, I really like that they have 2 CTAs here. One is their checkout. It just doesn't say next. And the other is email my bag. And a lot of times people get stuck saying share or maybe email, but they are actually very directive and action-oriented in email my bag. And they cater to kind of a younger audience. So a lot of times this is users who might be younger, emailing their bag to their parents saying, hey, this is the stuff I want to buy. And so again, here they're thinking about, what are those secondary conversions and ways that I can help my users convert across device and across time periods and touch points. This is kind of the #1 thing that I always mention. Usually everyone has some way that they can reduce the number of fields in their forms. I know I have gone on my mobile phone, I've clicked in to fill out some information, and this form just, if I start scrolling, looks like it will go on forever. And so the fewer form fields, the better. The fewer you can see up front, the easier it feels. And so some ideas, the first thing is just to remove all optional fields. A lot of people aren't going to go through the process of filling all of that out. And the extra information usually isn't worth the trade-off of potentially losing that extra conversion. So anything that's optional, I would really recommend removing. And this goes for desktop as well as mobile, but I think it's even more important on mobile. The next one is considering actually combining first and last name and having a full name field. This is what Amazon recently did on the left. And it can also be more culturally inclusive, depending on if you have multiple first, middle, last names. You don't have to necessarily fill those into 2 fields. The third one is potentially using the Google Places API to fill in address fields. And so you can see this example on the right, which is ThreadUp, uses the Places API. And what it does is it actually uses Google Maps locations that are stored. So you can start typing and it'll actually give you all these suggestions. If you find your exact address, you can then click on it and it actually autofills the 4 to 5 address fields that you would otherwise have to go through and type in one by one. It's really easy to implement. So if you do have the ability, check out the Google Places API. It is on the Google developers page or website. The last one is more specific to retail, but having billing as shipping checked by default. So especially more so in the B2C space versus B2B, a lot of times billing and shipping are the exact same address. And that's basically duplicate amount of form fields if you have to enter both. So if you have billing and shipping checked by default, that looks like a lot less fields that someone has to fill out. If they do need to change it or they want to ship to a different address from their billing address, they can then uncheck and you can have that section expand out. But makes it feel a lot shorter, less overwhelming. And you really do want to say, you know, having these extra fields, is that the trade-off of making this feel like a lengthy process where I could potentially be losing people who would otherwise convert? The next is really important, using inline validation and autofill. So I know I have gotten through an entire form, I click submit, it refreshes, takes me all the way back up to the top, and in red letters says, you know, something wasn't input correctly, please go back and fix it. And then I have to scroll through all these form fields, you know, maybe I forgot one number in my phone number, and actually see and find where I need to fix it, scroll all the way back down to the bottom, press submit. This doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but it's actually super frustrating, especially on mobile. And this is what inline validation tries to solve. So you'll see a lot of times you'll have green check marks and red X's. The fields will turn green or red if you skip one or input something wrong. And so this can be really helpful so you don't have to go back up to the top and redo the whole process, but you can actually fix things in line with when you mess them up. And why I really like this example on the left is it actually gives you a hint too at what might be wrong. So you can say, you know, you're missing one of your, you know, credit card number details, or we need your first name because it really helps us identify who you are. So you can provide some context to why those form fields are needed and how to fix it. The other is autofill, which is actually a setting in the browser, but you want to make sure it's able to be accessed. And this allows you to save information and just, you know, at one tap kind of autofill a lot of the address and contact information. So make sure, especially on the top browsers that are being used, check Google Analytics and make sure that this works across all different types of phones and browsers. Dropdowns. Now, dropdowns are a designer's least favorite thing. And this example actually, both of these are the Mango site. Mango is a retailer, and on the left was their previous design, and on the right is their new design. And with dropdowns and form field inputs, really my whole guideline is, can you do in one tap what you could previously do in 2 or 3 taps? Again, seems like a small change, but does make all the difference. So if there's less than 3 options in a dropdown, I'd recommend using buttons or separate options, just because that allows you to select with one click versus having to click into the dropdown, select your option, click apply, then continue on. And so you can see here, before they had delivery method, there was actually only 2 delivery methods. And so on the right, they actually moved this to just having the input selection. And this really speeds up the process. The last one here is using the correct keypads. And this is commonly overlooked and a very, very easy fix. Make sure you're always displaying the correct keypad. There's a numeric keypad and an alphabetic keypad. And this just ensures that users can enter without having to change the input mask. I know how many times, like on the left, I've gone to enter my zip code. I have to go press the tiny little number button in the corner, then type on the numbers on those really small keys, versus the one on the right is obviously a lot easier to use. So make sure you're using numeric for things like zip code, phone number, credit card info. And just in case, if you want to pause here, if this is a problem that you've had, or save this, bookmark it for later, I actually put the exact code that you can talk to your developer or your designer to fix this problem. So it is right here if you need it. Just in case, come back. This is a really easy fix, and again, is one of those things that just removes a little bit of that friction and makes this process more seamless and way quicker. All right, so hopefully you guys had some good suggestions in there, maybe some ones that apply to your conversion flow. I actually wanted to talk through an example of what this looks like in real life and talk through an example with Mango, which is what some similar team to mine worked with them to improve their mobile conversion flow. And we're going to look at how that impacted revenue, conversion rate, and some of the changes they made. So first, let's talk a little bit about the problem, how they identified that this was an issue. They were looking and seeing that too many users were abandoning carts on mobile versus desktop, and ideally what they would like to see. So they noticed that people were adding a lot to cart, they were getting to the beginning of the process, and then they were actually dropping out and potentially continuing later on, or just forgetting about the process altogether. So the question was, how can we improve our mobile user experience to improve the cart process and make sure that people are staying? So the first thing they did was look at this first step. And I have the before and after, kind of what this redesign looked like. So they wanted to improve the login and registration. This is something we talked about earlier, which is making sure that users know that they can check out as a guest. So in the first one, returning customer is kind of what's prompted up front. And you do actually see that there is a new customer section down below, which is kind of this checkout as guest functionality. But the issue is that when we're looking at a page kind of off the bat, we look for input fields. And because there's a lot more space on the one on the left, you actually can't see that there's an input field for new customer down below. And so what they did when they were redesigning this is they actually removed a lot of the white space and made sure to fit more information above the fold so that just at a glance, a customer would know that if they're returning, they could log in, or if they're new or didn't want to log in for any reason, maybe you forgot your password, you can just enter your email and continue with the conversion process. So this next step was just looking at the actual conversion flow. We already talked a little bit about this, but they had this drop down that only had 2 options, and this was for the delivery method. And they also had this kind of strange CTA. The next step that you would go to would be to enter your payment information, but their CTA said confirm payment, which is a little confusing if you don't necessarily, you haven't input your payment information already, so how could you confirm it? So afterwards, you can see here, they use the tap input, so it's really easy to select whether you want to pick up in store or have it shipped to your home. And they use continue here instead of confirm payment. They could be a bit more descriptive, but because of the new structure over on the right, which we'll talk about before, where you can see the various steps, it's kind of obvious that the payment section is what's next after you click that continue button. So when you get to payment, before there were a couple different payment options, but Visa, which was the first one, was just open by default. And so below, you can see a few of the other payment options, but you would actually have to scroll to, for example, understand that they actually took PayPal as a payment option. So instead, when they were thinking about this, they said, maybe a lot of people were going ahead and typing in, their credit card information and then realizing it wasn't a Visa and they had to switch. So instead, they gave a full overview of all of the payments that they accepted. And then you can click into one and actually enter the payment information after you've selected what type of payment option you want to have. So it's a little bit easier, kind of more intuitive. And now here's the additional example of how they kind of made this layout a little bit better. So after you selected Visa as your payment option, it was more structured. Then there would be a drop down where you can actually input all of the different elements. It's a little bit tighter in terms of the actual structure of the page. So you get a really easy overview just looking at one screen. The other thing that they did was they added an order summary before confirming. So before, you would put in your billing and shipping information, you would add your payment information, and then you would just click confirm payment. There was actually no order review, nowhere to say, hey, maybe I didn't want to get this item, or this was more than I expected in terms of shipping. So they added an order summary before confirming, and this prevented people from going back to just check what was in their cart and then having to go forward again. The last thing here is that you'll notice instead of pagination, they actually divided this and made it a single page conversion form, but you can really easily delineate and move between steps. So if I wanted to go back and change my delivery information, I could just click into that section, reopen it. I wouldn't have to click back to get back to that section and then go forward again. It's really easy to move between these 4 steps, and you get a really, it's easy to understand. You have an expectation of the different steps before you go into the process. So you can see, this isn't going to take too much time. This is pretty standard, nothing really to worry about, and it prevents a little bit of that friction. So what was the win here? They tested this new flow versus the old flow, and they found that the new flow had about 4.5% higher mobile conversion rate and 3.85% more revenue. So they moved to the new conversion flow. And this is an example. This is Mango, which is a large retailer. So this was a really big win, but just looks at how some of these small changes that might not seem like that big, together actually do lead to really, key impacts on KPIs like conversion rate, like revenue, as well as things like bounce rate. So the takeaway here, hopefully you guys have had some suggestions that have resonated. You have some things that you can talk to your developers and your designers about. And the takeaway is to start A/B testing these improvement ideas, and hopefully you should be seeing higher conversion rates soon. Now, I do want to take some time for Q&A. So if you do have questions, I'm going to go ahead and check, but add them to either the live stream or the comments section in the live stream link. Give me a second to get this loaded up. All right, so we have a couple questions here, it looks like, that are already coming in. And the first one I want to address is, says, what is the general consensus on dedicated in-site versus responsive site? We get this question a lot. And it really does depend on your company, your development team, and the goals you're trying to achieve. M.dot sites give you a lot more, control over the functionality as well as the design. But you do have to maintain 2 separate code bases. So depending on your development resources, can be harder to develop and maintain over time. Versus a responsive site is 1 code base, but you do have to be aware of, having desktop content on mobile and make some specific changes to make sure that things are formatted correctly for mobile. And especially, I think on the speed side, there's a lot more to be aware of to make sure that you don't have desktop images loading, or if you're removing content that you're not actually loading that in. That being said, we see a lot of both. So I think it really just does depend based on your resources and the type of industry that you're in. Let's see, we'll take another one. So it says, I use Shopify. Do you have any specifics that make conversion process easier for users? So a lot of these, we do work with clients who use Shopify, Magento, a lot of the pretty common e-commerce platforms. And these most of these suggestions should be able to be implemented either by customizing, or a lot of times there's plugins that allow you to do some extra design or things like inline validation. So I would just make sure to talk to someone on your support team, as well as just search through kind of the Shopify help. And make sure that you're checking to see what's available. Also, one of the things that I've done kind of in this presentation and that we do a lot is look for similar sites. Look for sites that you either really like how they're designed or see how a competitor is doing with their flow. Keep an eye on those type of things. And then if they're using Shopify, you know that you really like the site, you can see how they implement some of that by either looking at the code or the design and kind of port some of those over to your own user experience. Let's see. So another question that we got was pagination versus a single page checkout form. Which one do you think is better? And I think this really depends on how many steps there are, as well as how much information you need. And the best answer is to A/B test both if you have the resources and just see which one performs better. I think in retail, it's easier because it's a little bit more standard to use something single page and have items expand and close versus if you have a multi-step process, say you're in finance or you're collecting leads and you need a decent amount of personal information that might be 4, 5, 6 steps. That's where I think pagination is really important because it tells the user what type of information you're going to need, and it allows them to move back and forth in case they need to change or update anything. We have time for a couple more here. So let me check. It says, how does Mango handle validation? I'm not entirely sure if they use a plugin or if it's custom built. Validation is something, especially if you use a cart platform, does come as either a plugin or standard. So just check your provider if they do have validation. Otherwise, there's a lot of documentation on GitHub and Stack Overflow on various ways to actually implement and validate certain fields. So you want to make sure for a phone number field that it's 10 digits and they all have to be numeric. So I would just say check. There's a lot of resources. A lot of people write on this on the web. So I would check some of those forums as well as the help centers if you do use a specific form provider or cart provider. The last one here that I'm going to get to is how long would you recommend a company run an A/B test? This really depends on how much traffic that your site gets, as well as what you really want the statistical significance to be. Some A/B tests, it's kind of clear off the bat that this is much more improved. You may wait a week or two and say, we want to move over to the new design because it's a clear winner. I think the kind of standard is you want at least 3 to 4 times the average conversion process or conversion path link as a minimum. So if it takes on average 5 days for your users to convert, you want to do approximately 4 times that as kind of a minimum. But there's lots of different recommendations out there. I think it just depends on what you're testing. If you really do want to reach statistical significance, if it's a more important and larger change, you really do want to try to reach that, but it really depends on kind of what area of the site and how much traffic you get to it. Well, I think that is all the time we have for today. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll try to answer some of the other questions as comments in the link. But again, have a great rest of the day and see you next week.